Audiobook Introduction, Horda, by Anna Gogoleva, narrated by Jane. Introduction. Listen, can you hear it? That low, trembling note that vibrates in the darkness beneath the waves. That sound that has been singing for a century, waiting for someone to answer. This is the story of that sound. This is the story of the sea that remembers, the creatures that judge, and the child who dared to sing back. Welcome to Thrille, a small fishing town on the Ligurian coast of Italy, where the sea is grey and the wind carries salt and secrets. It is November, the storm season has begun, and something has awakened in the depths. They call it Il Cucitore, the sewer, an ancient octopus of impossible size and impossible intelligence. He does not kill, he collects. He drags the guilty into the abyss and forces them to relive their sins in oxygen pockets within a sunken ship. The wreck of the La Speranza, the Hope, which sank 60 years ago. But why? Why does he take only the sinners? Why does he spare the innocent? And what does a 12-year-old girl named Masha, who fell into the sea and found herself inside the creature's world, have to do with it all? In this audiobook, you will enter a world where science and mysticism collide. You will meet Elena Visconti, a brilliant biologist who discovers that the ocean communicates in frequencies we are only beginning to understand. She hears the song of the deep, a 3-part harmony that resonates with the human conscience. She calls it acoustic justice. Others call it madness. You will meet Marco Ricci, a weary police commissioner who has seen too much death and just wants to protect his town. He will send warships into the abyss. He will try to destroy the monster. But you cannot destroy what you do not understand. You will meet Matteo Bellini, a blind old man haunted by a sin he committed 99 years ago. A sin that set everything in motion. He knows the creature, he knows its pain, and he knows that the only way to stop the killing is to confess. And you will meet Masha. She is 12 years old, and she is pure. She has no sins, no guilt, no stain on her soul. And that makes her the only one who can approach the creature without fear. She will speak to him. She will sing to him. She will offer him the one thing he has not known for a century: forgiveness. This is not a story about monsters. It is a story about mirrors. It is about how we fear to see ourselves in the reflection of another's sin. About how the ocean remembers every word, every deed, every shadow we leave behind. About how even the darkest note can resolve into harmony. The ancient Slavs understood this. They had words for it. Zagovori, charms spoken to the sea in times of fear and hope. These words are woven into this story like threads of gold through a dark tapestry. They are not superstitions, they are keys. Keys to understanding, to reconciliation, to the harmony that lies beneath the noise of human existence. So, before you begin this journey, I ask you one thing. Listen. Listen to the waves. Listen to the silence between the notes. Listen to the ancient chant that has been waiting for you to hear it. For the sea is always listening to us. The question is, are we willing to listen back? This is Horda, the song of the deep, the story of a wound that healed, a symphony of sorrow, judgment, and redemption. I invite you now to close your eyes, if only for a moment, and let the sea take you. Because this is not just a story, it is a mirror. And in that mirror, you may just see yourself. The world is a symphony. Every soul is a note. The question is not whether we will sing, but whether we will sing in harmony. The sea is calling. Are you ready to listen? Horda, Book 1, The Rotten Calm. Chapter 1, The Sound of the Fisherman. Thrille, Liguria, Italy. November 1926. The sea had been wrong for 3 days. Matteo Bellini knew this the way he knew the weight of his own bones, through a kind of marrow-deep certainty that came from 17 years of breathing salt and listening to the rhythm of tides. The Scirocco had come early that year, dragging warm air from Africa across the Tyrrhenian, and with it came a peculiar stillness that made the fishermen of Pili uneasy. No birds, no foam on the breakers, just a flat, oily expanse that stretched toward the horizon like hammered lead. They called it the Mare Morto, the Dead Sea. Matteo had been mending his nets when he heard it, a sound so low it seemed to come from the earth itself, vibrating up through the soles of his worn leather boots. It was not a whale's song, nor the creak of a ship's timbers, nor any sound he had ever heard in his 17 years of listening to the sea. It was a note. A single, sustained note, like a cello string stretched across the entire Gulf of Genoa. Si bemolle. The note settled in his chest like a stone. His father, old Enzo Bellini, had taught him that the sea speaks in many voices. The hiss of foam on shingle, the groan of a hull against mooring lines, the distant thunder of a storm beyond the horizon. These were the language of Neptune, and any man who hoped to make his living from the water had better learn to understand them. But this sound was different. It was intelligent. Matteo had risen before dawn that morning, as he always did. His small fishing boat, the Stella Marina, was pulled up on the shingle beach below the cliffs, her blue paint faded to a pale, weary grey. She was not much of a vessel, 12 feet of weathered oak with a single mast and a hold that could barely carry 200 pounds of fish, but she was his. He had bought her with 3 years of savings from working the docks at La Spezia, and she was the only thing in the world that belonged entirely to him. The nets had been his second purchase. They were old, mended in a dozen places with coarse twine, but they were good nets, and they had caught more than a few fish in their time. Now, as he worked the knots loose with numb fingers, he found himself listening for the sound again. It did not come. The sky was a peculiar shade of grey, the kind that might precede a summer storm, or might simply linger for days, refusing to commit to rain or sun. The church bells of Pili rang for morning mass, their bronze voices carrying across the water with surprising clarity. Matteo crossed himself automatically, though he had not been to confession in 3 months. There was a sin sitting in his chest, a small, sharp thing that he had been trying to ignore, and the bells seemed to prod at it like a finger in a wound. He thought of Lucia, the baker's daughter, and the way she had looked at him last week at the festival of San Remo. She had smiled, and he had smiled back, and then her father had appeared, and Matteo had felt the weight of his poverty like a physical blow. Lucia's father had a vineyard and a stone house with glass windows, and a reputation as the richest man in Pili. Matteo had nothing but a boat and a prayer, and the taste of salt on his lips. Sin, the bells seemed to say. Sin, sin, sin. He worked faster. It was nearly noon when he finished the nets. He stood, stretching his back, and looked out across the Dead Sea. The stillness of the water had begun to feel oppressive, as though the entire Mediterranean was holding its breath. A thin haze hung over the horizon, softening the line between sea and sky until the two seemed to bleed into one another. That was when he saw the shape. At first he thought it was a log, a piece of driftwood washed down from some distant river, that it moved with a purpose that no log could match, a slow, undulating rhythm that cut through the flat water with preternatural grace. Matteo's hand went to his knife, an old habit he had developed after a shark came too close to his boat the previous summer. He watched the shape approach. It was perhaps 200 yards out when it broke the surface, and in that moment, Matteo Bellini's world changed forever. The creature that rose from the Dead Sea was beautiful in a way that transcended human understanding. She had the torso of a woman, full-breasted, with pale skin that seemed to glow with its own faint luminescence. Her hair was the colour of kelp, long and tangled, woven through with strands of silver that caught the weak light. She was young, no older than Matteo himself, and her face was a symphony of curiosity and sorrow. Below the waist she was fish, a great, powerful tail, covered in iridescent scales that shifted through every shade of green and blue. The tail was massive, easily 10 feet long, and it moved with a controlled grace that spoke of incredible strength. Matteo had heard the old stories, of course. Every child in Liguria grew up hearing tales of the Sirene, the mermaids who sang sailors to their deaths beneath the waves. But those were stories for children, for the weak-minded and the superstitious. His father had always dismissed them with a wave of his hand, saying, "The sea is full of things we don't understand, but there are no monsters in it, only animals." This was no animal. The creature's eyes met his, and in them Matteo saw something that shattered his faith in the order of the world. They were not the eyes of a fish, nor the eyes of a woman. They were the eyes of something ancient, something that had been watching humanity since the first men gathered on the shore and wondered what lay beyond the waves. She was entangled in a fishing net. It was one of the new nets, the ones the commercial trawlers from Genoa used, nylon mesh so fine that it could trap even the smallest fry. It had wrapped around her tail, cutting into the flesh, and she was struggling, her movements becoming weaker as the net tightened with each attempt to free herself. The sound came again, si bemol. It was coming from her. She was singing, a low, resonant note that seemed to vibrate in Matteo's chest, in his teeth, in the very marrow of his bones. And as she sang, he understood, not in words, not even in images, but in a way that bypassed language entirely, that she was pleading. "Help me. Please, help me." He should have saved her. He should have waded into the water, cut the net with his knife, and helped her swim free. It was the Christian thing to do. It was the human thing to do. And for a moment, Matteo's hand moved toward his belt, toward the knife that hung there in its leather sheath. But then he heard the footsteps. Salvatore, the baker, was walking down the beach with his youngest daughter, Maria. They were collecting sea glass, a hobby of the child's. Salvatore was a good man, a church-going man, but he was also the father of Lucia, and he had looked at Matteo with suspicion since the festival. The creature saw them too. Her eyes went wide with fear, and she began to thrash more desperately. The net tightened. Her beautiful, luminescent skin was torn by the nylon threads. She made another sound, not a song now, but a cry of pain, and Matteo felt it pierce his chest like a spear. Salvatore stopped. "Matteo, what is that? What are you doing?" The words came out before Matteo could stop them. "It's a fish. Just a fish. Caught in a net." He was lying. He was lying to the baker, to himself, to the creature in the water whose eyes were still locked on his. And in that moment, he made a choice. He picked up the oar. It was a simple thing, a length of pine that had been smoothed by years of use. It was heavy and solid. It felt right in his hands, familiar and reliable, like the prayers his mother had taught him before she died. The creature understood what he was about to do. She tried to sing again, but it was too late. Matteo's heart was already closed, sealed against her plea by the weight of his own fear. Fear that they would think him mad, that they would call him a liar, that they would never let him marry Lucia or escape the grinding poverty that had been his birthright. "Matteo!" Salvatore shouted. "What are you doing?" He waded into the water. The sea was cold, colder than he had expected, and it filled his boots with a shock that seemed to wake him from a dream. The creature was close now. So close, he could see the faint blood vessels in her eyes, the way her gill slits fluttered with each desperate breath. "Please," she sang. "Please, please, please." He swung the oar. It connected with her head with a wet, sickening crack. Her song cut off mid-note, and for a moment there was absolute silence. No wind, no waves, no bells from the church. Just the heavy, dead stillness of the world. Her eyes were still looking at him when she sank. He could have stopped. He could have plunged into the water, saved her, made it right. But the fear was too strong, and the lie was already growing inside him, building itself into a story he would tell himself for the rest of his life. It was a monster. It would have killed you. You did what you had to do. He buried her on the beach. The sand was soft and wet, easy to dig. He did not think about what he was doing as he worked. He simply did it, as though his body were carrying out a task that his mind could not bear to acknowledge. By the time he was finished, the tide was coming in, and the mound of sand where she lay had become indistinguishable from the rest of the beach. Si bemol, the note echoed in his skull over and over, a sound that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He did not know it then, but that note was already carving itself into his DNA, becoming a part of him that could never be removed. When he turned around, Salvatore was gone. Chapter 2. The Smell of Rotten Lemons. Pili, Liguria, Italy, November 2026. The body had been dead for approximately 48 hours. Marco Ricci knew this not because he had examined it, he had not yet come close enough to examine it, but because the smell had already begun to change. There was an art to reading death, one that Marco had learned over 25 years in the Polizia di Stato, and the art began with knowing that a body, like a fine wine, matured through distinct stages. Fresh death was metallic, almost clean. Two-day death was cloying, sweet, with an undertone of something that reminded Marco of rotten lemons, though he could never quite explain why. He stood at the edge of the beach, a strong gust of wind lifting the collar of his coat, and watched the forensics team do their work. They were a cluster of white suits against the grey November sand, their movements brisk and professional. He could not see the body itself. It was behind a screen that had been hastily erected to protect it from the press, but he had seen the photographs that his deputy had brought him half an hour ago. The dead man's skin had been bleached, not burned, not peeled, not stripped away by friction or decomposition. Bleached, as though someone had held him under the water of a chemical bath for hours. But there was a pattern to the bleaching, a kind of intricate tracer work that ran across the man's chest and arms like the veins on a leaf. It was almost beautiful, in a terrible way. A curious detail: the man's face was untouched. His eyes were wide open. Marco lit a cigarette, drawing the smoke deep into his lungs. The nicotine kicked in instantly, a familiar comfort against the ache that had settled in his lower back after years of sitting in cars and leaning over crime scenes. He was 53 years old, and his body had begun to remind him of that fact in ways that he found deeply irritating. "Commissario?" The voice came from behind him, a woman's voice, low and musical. Marco turned to find Dr. Elena Visconti approaching through the dunes, her heeled boots making an uncertain path across the soft sand. She was 30 years old, give or take, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the colour of the Tyrrhenian Sea on a clear day. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and she wore a heavy wool coat over what Marco guessed was a business suit. She was also carrying a laptop bag that looked heavy enough to contain a small world. "Professor," Marco said, nodding, "you came quickly." "You said it was urgent." Elena stopped a careful distance from him, her eyes scanning the scene with a professional curiosity that seemed almost clinical. "I've been tracking a pattern of unusual marine behaviour for the past 3 weeks. When you told me about this body, I thought it was time to talk." Marco took another drag of his cigarette, studying her. He had met Elena Visconti twice before, once at a symposium on environmental crime, and once at a dinner party hosted by the mayor. She was a biologist, one of the leading researchers in the Mediterranean, specializing in cetacean behavior and bioacoustics. She was also, Marco had learned, something of a legend in her field. Her work on dolphin communication had been cited in journals across the world, and there were rumors that she had been approached by governments to consult on classified projects. But there was something about her that made Marco uncomfortable. It was not her intelligence. He had worked with many brilliant people over the years, but the peculiar intensity of her focus. When Elena Visconti looked at you, she looked through you, as though you were a specimen that might be pinned to a board and studied at leisure. "The body was found by a jogger at 6:30 this morning," Marco said, offering her the details as though they were pieces on a chessboard. "Male, estimated age 45 to 50. No identification. His skin shows extensive bleaching and there are," he paused, trying to find the right word, "textures on his chest that we don't recognize." Elena's eyebrows lifted. "Textures? Come and see for yourself." He led her down the beach, toward the cluster of forensics officers. One of them, a young woman whose face was barely visible behind her goggles, looked up as Marco approached. "Commissario, the victim has no wounds, no signs of trauma, no water in his lungs, which is interesting, given that he was found on the beach." Marco nodded. He had expected as much. The body lay on a silver tarp, covered with a sheet that the forensics team had been using to preserve it from the weather. Marco gestured to it, and the young woman pulled back the sheet with a practiced motion. Elena Visconti made a soft sound. It was not a gasp, not quite. It was the sound of a scientist making a connection, a small, almost musical note that Marco had heard before, from specialists who saw something that challenged their understanding of the world. The victim's skin was indeed bleached, but what Marco had failed to describe adequately was the texture of it. The white patches covered a third of his torso, arranged in a spiral pattern that seemed to coil around his ribs. Within the white areas, there were tiny ridges, like the ridges on the inside of a seashell, and these ridges seemed to be arranged in a pattern that Marco almost recognized. "The victim's eyes," Elena said, her voice carefully neutral. "They're still open." Marco looked. The eyes were a pale grey, the colour of the sky over the Dead Sea, and they stared upward with an expression of absolute terror. But terror was not quite the right word. It was something more complex, something Marco had seen only in the faces of people who had been forced to confront something they could not understand. It was the expression of a man who had seen his own reflection and been horrified by what he found. "Are they supposed to be that colour?" Marco asked. The forensics officer shook her head. "No, Commissario. The victim had brown eyes. This is..." She paused, frowning. "This is something else." Elena knelt beside the body, her hands hovering over the white patches, as though she could feel their texture through the air. "May I?" she asked. "Go ahead," Marco said. She did not touch the body, but her fingers traced the spiral pattern in the air, following its curve from the man's chest to his ribs to his lower abdomen. Her lips moved slightly, as though she were counting something. "It's a frequency," she said finally. "The pattern on his skin. It's a map of a frequency." Marco blinked. "A frequency? What kind of frequency?" Elena stood, brushing sand from her knees. "Sound," she said. "This pattern is acoustic interference, the kind you would see if you exposed human skin to a focused, sustained sound wave at a very specific frequency. The energy of the sound would cause proteins in the skin to denature, creating this," she gestured at the white patches, "this bleaching effect." "You're saying someone killed this man with a noise?" "I'm saying someone killed this man with a sound." Elena's eyes were bright now, bright with the intensity of discovery. And not just any sound, a specific frequency, one that would resonate with the victim's own cellular structure. Marco stared at her. The wind had picked up, blowing sand across the beach, and he could taste salt on his lips, mixed with the acrid tang of his cigarette. He thought about the body, about the white patches, about the expression of terror on the victim's face. "Who was he?" he asked. The forensics officer handed him a folder. "We found this in his pocket, Commissario. It seems to have been deliberately placed there." Marco opened the folder. Inside was a photograph, a simple portrait of a young girl with dark hair and a shy smile. There was nothing else. No note, no identification, no explanation of why the photograph had been left with the body. But there was something else, tucked into the back of the folder. A small piece of paper, folded into a tight square. Marco unfolded it and read the words written there in a handwriting he did not recognize. He listened to the song, and the song consumed him. The sea carries all voices, but only those who deserve to hear them will ever understand. Marco felt a cold shiver run down his spine. This was not a crime. This was a message. Chapter 3. The Old Man and His Shadows. The shutters of the villa were closed against the November wind, but the light inside was still more than enough to see the old man. Matteo Bellini was 99 years old, though he had stopped counting birthdays years ago. His face was a map of a life lived hard, deep lines carved by wind and salt and the terrible weight of memory, and his hands, folded in his lap like sleeping birds, were gnarled and knotted with arthritis. His hair was a crown of white feathers, thin as spider silk, and his eyes were a pale, watery blue that seemed to have been diluted by years of tears. He was blind now, blind for the past decade, but he had learned to see in other ways. He could hear the whisper of the sea through the cracks in the walls, feel the vibration of the tide through the floorboards beneath his bare feet. He could taste the salt in the air, smell the rotting kelp on the shore, and he could hear the note. Si bemol. It came to him every night, a sound that no one else seemed to hear, vibrating through his bones like a tuning fork struck by an invisible hand. It had been haunting him for 99 years. The sound of his sin, the sound of the creature he had killed on a beach that seemed to exist in another lifetime. The note had become a part of him, as familiar as his own heartbeat, and he had long ago stopped wondering whether it was real or a product of his guilty imagination. "Sit down, Professor. I am old, but I do not bite." The words emerged from his throat as a dry rustle, the sound of a voice that had not been used for days. He had been living alone since his wife died in 2003, and he had grown accustomed to the silence, to the company of his own thoughts, to the endless procession of memories that played behind his eyelids like a film he could not turn off. Elela Visconti had visited him before. She came every few years, a persistent young woman who seemed determined to unlock the secrets of the old man's past. She had written papers about him, about the fishing village of Pili, about the old stories that had been passed down through generations. but she had never asked the right question. "I need to ask you something," Elena said, settling into the chair across from him. "I've been tracking a pattern of deaths along the Ligurian coast. The bodies show evidence of exposure to a specific acoustic frequency." "The note," Matteo said. Elena fell silent. He could feel the weight of her attention, the intensity of her focus. It was the same look she had worn the last time she visited, the look of a scientist who had found a specimen that would make her career. "Yes," she said finally. "The note. How did you know?" Matteo laughed, a dry, rasping sound that turned into a cough. "I have known the note for 99 years. It is the song of the siren, Professor, the sound of the creatures you refuse to acknowledge." He could hear her shift in her seat, the soft rustle of her clothing. He knew she was looking around the room, at the faded photographs on the walls, at the collection of old fishing nets that hung from the ceiling like the webs of enormous spiders, at the single object that sat on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. It was an oar. An old oar, worn smooth by years of use, its wood stained with the green of salt and the dark brown of something that might have been blood. He had kept it all these years, though he had never been able to explain why. "I have heard stories of the fishermen of Pili," Elena said carefully. "They speak of a musician from the sea, a creature that sings, but I have never found any physical evidence." "The evidence is in the bodies," Matteo interrupted. "You have seen them, have you not? The bodies on the beach, the bodies in the water, the bodies that are bleached white like bone under a Mediterranean sun." He heard the sharp intake of breath, the quick, quiet sound of a scientist's certainty cracking under the weight of the unknown. "You know what is killing these people." "I know what is judging them." Matteo leaned forward, his blind eyes fixed on the space where he knew Elena was sitting. "He calls himself the Il Cucitore, the sewer. He has been here for a century, Professor, waiting. He does not kill, he examines. He looks into the heart of every man who comes near the water, and if he finds the stench of sin, he drags them down to the place where they must face the truth." Elena's voice was very quiet. "The truth of what?" "Of themselves." Matteo sat back in his chair, his old bones creaking with the movement. "I killed one of them, Professor. 99 years ago, I killed a creature that came to me for help, and every night I hear her song. Si bemolle, the note that condemns us all." The room was silent for a long moment. Elena's silence was not the silence of shock, Matteo thought, but of calculation. She was weighing his words, measuring them against the evidence she had gathered, trying to find a way to fit them into her scientific framework. "There is something else," she said finally. "I found a body this morning. A man, no identification. He had a photograph in his pocket and a note. The note said, 'The sea carries all voices, but only those who deserve to hear them will ever understand.'" Matteo felt something shift inside him, a cold certainty that had been building for weeks. "The child," he said. Elena frowned. "What child?" "Marco's daughter, the Russian girl." He waved a hand, as though brushing away a cloud of flies. "The one who went missing from the boat tour 2 days ago. I heard the fishermen talking about her. She is in the water, Professor, and if she is still alive, it is because she is the only one who is innocent." Elena was on her feet now. "You think the girl is still alive? How can you know?" "Because I know how the Il Cucitore works. He examines the soul, Professor. He does not destroy it. If he has taken her, it is because he found her clean, and if he found her clean, he will not hurt her." The words hung in the air, a terrible hope that Elena could not quite bring herself to believe. "How do I reach him?" she asked. Matteo laughed again, a sound that was half sob, half madness. You cannot reach him, Professor. No one can reach him. He is a wound that will not heal, a scream that will not stop. He is the vengeance of the sea, and the sea does not bargain. He leaned forward, his sightless eyes burning with a fire that had nothing to do with vision. But there is one thing you can do. You can find the old priest, the one who knows the words. Words? From the old tongue, the words of the Sea Fathers. Matteo's voice dropped to a whisper, a sound that was barely audible above the moan of the wind. The Zagavor, the incantation from the ancient land, the one that has power over the creatures of the deep. Find the priest, Professor, and you will find your answer. The chant of the ancient Sea Fathers. С именем океана, с кровью глубины, силы тьмы и света, что спит на дне моря, зовем вас, стражи старинного времени, чтобы услышали голос наш в глубине. Разомкни воды, чтобы мы видели, открой двери в подводном царстве. Сила, что в морских кораллах живет, пробуди нас, чтобы волна спела. Тело и душа, что в глубине отданы, откройтесь перед нами в этой чаше. Древний заговор силы морской, кротости, хищник или будь судимый нами. 3 раза по 3 и 3 по 3. Запретный круг, что ни разу не разомкнут. Сила древняя, что в море живет, ответы нам дайте, чтобы мы поняли правду. Transliteration and meaning. With the name of ocean, with the blood of the deep, powers of darkness and light that sleeps on the sea floor, we call you, guardians of ancient time, to hear our voice in the depths. Open the waters that we may see. Unlock the doors in the underwater kingdom. Power that lives in the coral of the sea, awaken us so that the wave may sing. Body and soul given to the depths, reveal yourselves before us in this hour. Ancient incantation of the sea's power, submit, predator, or be judged by us. 3 times 3 and 3 times 3, the forbidden circle that is never broken. Ancient power that lives in the sea, give us answers so that we may know the truth. Chapter 4. Music for an Octopus. Thrille, Liguria, November 2026. The recording began with static, the white noise of a million tiny collisions between water molecules and the sensitive hydrophone that Elena Visconti had lowered into the abyss 3 days ago. She sat in her makeshift laboratory, a converted storage room in the old lighthouse at the edge of the Thrille harbour, surrounded by screens, cables, and the faint smell of ozone that always accompanied her equipment. The static faded, and then the sound came. It was not a single note this time, it was a chord. 3 distinct frequencies layered on top of one another, weaving a tapestry of sound that seemed to vibrate in Elena's chest. She had isolated the fundamental frequencies, 52 Hz, 78 Hz, and 103 Hz. They formed a harmonic progression that was almost musical, a minor triad that resolved into something that sounded like a question that demanded an answer. Elena had been listening to this recording for 6 hours straight. Her eyes were dry, her neck stiff, but she could not stop. There was something in the sound that spoke to her on a level deeper than conscious thought, something that bypassed her scientific training and went straight to the primal core of her being. She had named the frequencies as she always did. The 52 Hz was the Rusalka, named for the Slavic water spirits her grandmother had told her about. The 78 Hz was the Delfino, the dolphin voice, bright and piercing. And the 103 Hz was the Mostro, the monster, the deep, rumbling undertone that seemed to come from the very floor of the Tyrrhenian Sea. The Mostro was the one that fascinated her. It was not a natural frequency. Dolphins could produce sounds at 78 Hz, yes, and the Rusalka, the creature she had tentatively identified as a relic population of highly intelligent Cyrenians, could produce the 52 Hz. But the 103 Hz was different. It was too consistent, too controlled. It pulsed with the rhythm of something mechanical, something that was being deliberately generated. She had cross-referenced the frequency against every known source in the Mediterranean. Shipping traffic? No. Submarine communications? Too low. Geological activity? The pattern was too regular, and then she had found it. The 103 Hz matched the resonant frequency of the hull of a specific class of ocean liner built in the 1950s, made of a particular alloy of steel and copper. The resonance occurred when the ship's structure was subjected to a sustained acoustic pressure of a specific amplitude. The effect was like striking a tuning fork and holding it against a wine glass. The glass would vibrate, and if the frequency was exactly right, it would shatter. Or, in this case, sing. Eleanor pulled up the file she had been avoiding for the past 3 days. It was a historical record, a simple shipping manifest from 1962. The vessel was called the La Speranza, a small cruise liner that had disappeared during a November storm, taking 237 passengers and crew to the bottom of the Ligurian Sea. The official inquiry had blamed the storm. No survivors, no bodies recovered. The wreckage had never been found. But Eleanor had found it. Not the physical wreck, not yet, but its acoustic signature. The 103 Hz was the sound of the La Speranza itself, singing in its watery grave. The ship had become a resonator, a giant tuning fork, and something was using it to broadcast its message into the depths. "Professor?" The voice came from the doorway. It was Officer Rosa Mandelli, Marco Ricci's deputy, a wiry woman in her 40s with a face that had seen too many horrors. She held a tablet in her hand, and her expression was troubled. "We have another one." Eleanor turned from her screens. Another body. Another disappearance. Rosa stepped into the room, her boots echoing on the stone floor. A man named Alexei Kovalenko, Ukrainian national, son of a major oligarch. He was staying at the Hotel Belvedere, and he went for a walk on the beach last night. He never came back. Eleanor felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The Hotel Belvedere? That's 3 kilometers from here. 2.8 to be precise. Rosa handed her the tablet. "We found his belongings in his room, his passport, his wallet, his phone, but there's something else." Eleanor looked at the tablet. The screen showed a photograph of the hotel room, pristine and untouched. On the bedside table, next to a half-empty bottle of vodka, there was a single object. A seashell. It was a Coronia lampas, a large predatory sea snail, its shell a spiral of cream and brown. And inside the spiral, written in what appeared to be black ink, there was a word. Dolgi. Debts. Eleanor felt the chill run down her spine again. When did he disappear? Sometime between midnight and 3 a.m. His phone last pinged at 2:14 a.m. from a location about 200 meters offshore. The signal then stopped. Eleanor stood up, her eyes still fixed on the seashell. Debts. In Russian. He was a Ukrainian oligarch's son. The word debts. What kind of debts? Rosa shrugged. Financial, probably, but there's more to it. We checked his background. Alexei Kovalenko had been indicted in absentia by the Ukrainian government for human trafficking. He was supposedly in Italy to negotiate a deal with local smugglers, the kind of deal that involves people. Eleanor thought of the body on the beach, the bleached skin, the spiral pattern. She thought of the note. The sea carries all voices, but only those who deserve to hear them will ever understand. Debt, she said softly. Not money. Moral debt. The monster is collecting what is owed. Rosa's eyes went wide. You're saying that thing, whatever it is taking people based on their sins? I'm saying I don't know what it's doing. Eleanor closed the file on her screen and grabbed her coat. But I'm going to find out. Take me to the Hotel Belvedere. Chapter 5. The Collection of Vices. The Hotel Belvedere was a grand old structure perched on a cliff above the sea, its white facade gleaming in the grey November light. It had once been a retreat for European aristocrats, but now it catered to a different kind of clientele. Russians, Arabs, the nouveau riche who had money to burn and secrets to hide. Marco Ricci was already there when Eleanor arrived. He stood in the lobby, his coat damp from the drizzle, his expression grim. He had not slept in 2 days, and it showed in the circles under his eyes and the tremor in his hands as he lit yet another cigarette. "Professor," he said, nodding as she approached, "you've seen the seashell?" "I've seen it." Eleanor fell into step beside him as they walked toward the elevators. Kovalenko had debts, human trafficking debts. The creature is selective. Selective or not, we're facing a crisis. Marco pressed the button for the 5th floor. The mayor is calling for a full-scale search operation. The Navy wants to send in divers. I told them to hold off until we understand what we're dealing with. That was wise. The elevator doors slid closed, enclosing them in a small space that smelled of cologne and stale coffee. Divers would be killed. Whatever is down there, it's not a shark. It's something else entirely. And you know what it is? Eleanor hesitated. She had not told Marco about the recording, about the frequencies, about the ancient ritual that Matteo Bellini had hinted at. She was not sure if she could explain it in a way that would not sound like the ravings of a madwoman. "I have a theory," she said carefully, "but I need more data. I need to see the hotel room, the victim's belongings. I need to understand what he was running from." The elevator opened onto a corridor that was quiet and plush, with thick carpet and soft lighting. Police tape stretched across the door of Suite 512. Rosa Mandelli was already there, and she handed Marco a pair of latex gloves as he approached. "Forensics has been through the room twice," Rosa said. "They found traces of cocaine, some financial documents, and a phone with a long list of contacts. No DNA from anyone except Kovalenko and the hotel staff." Eleanor stepped through the door and into the room. It was large, with a king-sized bed and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the grey, churning sea. The window was open a crack, and the wind whistled through, carrying the smell of salt and decay. She went to the bedside table. The seashell was still there, sitting in a small dish next to the vodka bottle. Eleanor picked it up carefully, examining the ink. It was not ink, she realized, but a substance that seemed to have been secreted from inside the shell itself. It had the consistency of mucus, and it smelled faintly of something metallic, like blood and copper. "This is the creature's mark," she said softly. "The shell was left here deliberately. It's a signature." "A signature of what?" Marco asked. "A judgment." Eleanor turned the shell over in her hands. Kovalenko trafficked people. He sold human beings, and the sea took him as payment for his debts. Marco shook his head, frustration and fear warring on his face. "That's just a theory. We don't know that this monster operates on some kind of moral code. It could be random. It could be territorial." "It's not random." Eleanor's voice was sharp, cutting through his protest. "I've analysed the victims. Every single one had a history of violence, exploitation, betrayal. They were not innocent people. They were the worst of humanity. The creature is not killing them. It's harvesting them. It's taking what it considers to be a just punishment." The room fell silent. The wind howled outside, rattling the window. Marco looked at her, his eyes searching for any sign that she was joking, that she had finally lost her mind. "Harvesting," he repeated. What does that even mean? Eleanor set the shell down carefully. I think it means we're dealing with something that has been waiting for a long time. Something that feeds on guilt. Something that hears the screams of the damned and uses them as its nourishment. She took a step back, her mind racing through the data, the frequencies, the old man's words. And then she remembered what Matteo had said about the priest, the ancient incantation from the old country. Marco, I need to find someone. An old priest. Matteo mentioned him. He has a ritual, an incantation from the east that might be able to speak to whatever is down there. Do you know where I can find him? Marco frowned. There's an old church in the hills, Sant Anna. Father Vasily. He's Russian Orthodox, been here for 30 years. The locals say he knows things. Eleanor felt a surge of hope. Take me to him. Chapter 6. The Dirtiest Professions. The Church of St. Anna was a small stone building hidden among the olive groves above Pili. It was old, perhaps medieval, and its walls were covered with faded frescoes depicting saints that Eleanor did not recognize. The air inside was cold and smelled of incense and candle wax. Father Vasily was a tall, gaunt man with a long grey beard and eyes that seemed to look through the world rather than at it. He greeted them at the door with a slight bow, his cassock rustling as he moved. Commissario? Professor? His voice was soft, accented with the consonants of his native Russian. I was told you would come. Marco exchanged a glance with Eleanor. You were expecting us? The sea is restless. Vasily turned and led them into the nave, his footsteps echoing on the worn stone floor. I have been praying for 3 days now. The prayers of the old fathers. The words that have power over the creatures of the deep. Eleanor felt a jolt of recognition. The incantation. The one from the ancient Rus. You know it? Vasily smiled, a sad, knowing expression. I know it, Professor. I have known it since I was a child, when my grandmother told me the stories of the sea fathers and the spirits that dwell in the waters. I have never had cause to use it before. Then you know how to stop it, Marco said, his voice sharp with urgency. You can tell us what we need to do. Vasily shook his head. I cannot stop it. The creature is beyond my power. But I can teach you the words that will calm it, that will allow you to speak to it on its own terms. The words of the old forgiveness. He led them to a small side chapel where a single candle flickered in a red glass holder. There was a book on the altar, old and worn, its pages yellowed with age. Vasily opened it with reverent hands and began to read. The words were in Old Church Slavonic, a language that Elena could not fully understand but could feel in her bones. They were rhythmic, hypnotic, a chant that seemed to resonate in the very walls of the chapel. Vasily's voice was low and powerful, and as he spoke, Elena saw the candle flame flicker, as though a sudden draught had passed through the room. This is the Zagovor, Vasily said, pausing to catch his breath. It has many names, the binding, the sea's confession. It was spoken by the ancient Rus when they feared the wrath of the water. It does not command, it requests. It offers peace in exchange for understanding. Elena stepped forward. Can you teach me? The words, the pronunciation. I need to be able to use it. Vasily looked at her, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. The words are not enough, Professor. You must believe them. The creature will sense any falsehood, any doubt. It will not be fooled. Elena felt the weight of that statement. She had spent her life as a scientist, doubting everything, questioning every assumption. Faith was not something that came easily to her, but she had also spent the last 3 days listening to the screams of the dead. "I will believe," she said. "Tell me the words." As Vasily began to teach her the ancient chant, Marco Ricci's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his face went pale. "What is it?" Elena asked. "2 more disappearances," Marco said, his voice tight. "A Romanian woman and a Ukrainian woman. Prostitutes. Both known for running scams on elderly Italians, tricking them into signing over their properties. They were last seen in a villa near the port." Elena closed her eyes. The pattern was becoming clearer. The creature doesn't discriminate. It takes anyone who has committed a crime against the innocent. "Are they dead?" she asked. "Unknown. There's no sign of bodies." Marco put his phone away. "But the villa is empty, and there's a seashell on the table, like the one in Kovalenko's room." Elena looked at Vasily, who was watching her with those ancient, knowing eyes. "This creature," she said, "it is not a monster. It's a mirror. It reflects the sins of humanity back at them. And if we want to survive, we have to learn to look in that mirror." Vasily nodded slowly. "You are beginning to understand, Professor. But understanding is only the first step. The second step is courage. And the third—" He paused, his eyes growing distant. "The third is mercy." Chapter 7. The Choir of the Beggars. The man was found at dawn, kneeling in the surf like a penitent at an altar. His name was Kwame, though no one in Pili knew that yet. He had been a guard at a migrant detention camp in Libya, a place where the Mediterranean's desperate souls were stripped of their dignity and their hope. He had beaten them, starved them, sold some of them to the traffickers who would pack them into boats that were never meant to float. His hands had been instruments of cruelty, and his conscience had been silent for years. Now he had no voice at all. Marco Ricci knelt beside him on the wet sand, his knees soaking through his trousers. The man was alive, barely, his chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged breaths. His skin was a deep brown, but it had a peculiar pallor beneath, as though something had drained the vitality from him from the inside out. His eyes were wide open, staring at the grey sky, and his lips moved soundlessly. "He's trying to say something," Rosa Mandelli said, crouching on the other side. "But I can't hear anything." Marco leaned closer. The man's lips formed shapes, syllables, but no sound emerged. It was as though his vocal cords had been severed by an invisible blade. He was screaming silently, trapped in a prison of his own flesh. "Get the paramedics," Marco ordered, "and get Professor Visconti, now." By the time Elena arrived, the paramedics had stabilized the man and were preparing to move him to the hospital in La Spezia. But Elena stopped them, her eyes fixed on the sand where the man had been kneeling. There were words written there. Not in any language Elena recognized immediately, but in a crude, desperate script that looked like it had been scratched by fingers clawing at the wet earth. The letters were uneven, some half erased by the rising tide, but she could make out enough. "Canto l'oceano canta." The ocean sings. Elena looked at the man. Kwame, she would learn his name later, and felt a wave of nausea wash over her. He was not a victim in the traditional sense. She knew the reports, the statistics, the horror stories from the Libyan coast. The men who ran those camps were predators, feeding on the desperation of the displaced. But what had happened to him was not justice. It was something else entirely. "Professor," Rosa said quietly, "he's been muttering since we found him. No words, just sounds. But the sounds, they sound like voices. Many voices, all at once. Elena stepped closer to the stretcher. The man's eyes were still open, and they met hers with an intensity that made her shiver. He reached up with one trembling hand, his fingers brushing against her sleeve. And then she heard it. Not with her ears, but with something deeper, something that resonated in her chest like a second heartbeat. It was the sound of screams. Hundreds, thousands of screams, layered on top of one another, a chorus of agony that seemed to come from the man himself. He hears them, Elena realized. He hears the voices of everyone he hurt. They are inside him, singing their pain. The man's hand fell back to his side, and his eyes fluttered closed. The paramedics loaded him into the ambulance and drove away, leaving Elena standing alone on the beach, the taste of salt and horror on her lips. "He's not going to make it," Rosa said softly. "I've seen that look before. The soul has already left. The body is just catching up." Elena nodded, her mind racing. This is what the creature does. It doesn't just kill them. It makes them live with their sins. It makes them feel every moment of pain they have caused, over and over, until they break. Rosa shuddered. And the ones who don't break? They get collected, stored, kept in a place where they can experience their guilt forever. Elena turned to face the sea, the grey waves stretching endlessly toward the horizon. I need to go down there. I need to see what's at the bottom. Rosa grabbed her arm. You can't be serious. The depths, the pressure, the cold. I have a prototype submersible, Elena said, her voice hard. I was building it for research. It's rated for 500 meters. The wreck of the La Speranza is at 400. I can do this. Rosa shook her head slowly. Commissario Ricci will never approve this. Elena turned to look at her eyes blazing with the fire of certainty. Then don't tell him. I'm going with or without permission. I need to see the creature. I need to understand. Chapter 8. The Old Man and His Guilt. Matteo Bellini was dying. He knew this the way he knew the note, the way he knew the rhythm of the tides. His body was a broken vessel, its seams finally giving way after 99 years of battering by wind and salt and the heavy weight of memory. He could feel the darkness gathering at the edges of his consciousness, the long sleep that waited for him at the end of all things. But there was something he had to do before he let go. The girl had come to him again, Elena Visconti, the professor with the eyes of a hunter. She had been visiting him every day now, her voice sharp with urgency, her questions relentless. She had learned the words of the Zagavor from Father Vasily, and she had come to ask Matteo for the final piece of the puzzle. Tell me what you know, she said, sitting in the chair beside his bed. Tell me about the creature. Tell me what it wants. Matteo had been silent for a long time, his blind eyes fixed on the ceiling. The note was pounding in his skull. Si bemolle, si bemolle, a drumbeat of guilt that had never ceased. I killed her, he said finally. I killed her because I was afraid. Afraid they would think me mad. Afraid I would lose everything. I was 17, and I was a coward. Elena reached out, her hand finding his. Who did you kill? A sirena, a mermaid, as the old stories call them. She was entangled in a net, and she pleaded with me to help her. But there were people coming, and I was afraid. So I took an oar, and I... His voice broke, a dry sob that rattled in his chest. I struck her. I killed her. And I buried her in the sand. The room was silent except for the moan of the wind. And that's when the note began? Elena asked softly. The si bemolle? It never stopped. Matteo turned his head toward her, his sightless eyes somehow finding her face. She cursed me, Professor. With her dying breath, she sang the note that would haunt me for the rest of my life. And now I know why. Why? Matteo's voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible. Because she was pregnant. The creature's mother. The great one, the ancient one. He lost his mate and his child that day. And he has been searching for vengeance ever since. Elena sat back, her hand falling from his. The octopus. The Il Cucitore. He's the father. He is the grief that never heals, Matteo laughed, a hollow, broken sound. He has been collecting sinners for a century, Professor. He takes them to the wreck of the La Speranza, where he forces them to confront their guilt. But he never takes me. He leaves me here, alive, suffering, so that I can know what it is to lose everything and have nothing left but regret. Elena leaned forward, her voice fierce. Then help me stop him. Help me save the people he's taken. There's a child down there, Matteo. A little girl. She's innocent. She doesn't deserve to suffer for the sins of others. Matteo was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached up, his gnarled fingers finding Elena's face, tracing her cheekbones with an ancient tenderness. You must speak the words, he said. The Zagavor. You must speak them from the heart, not the mind. The creature will sense any falsehood. He will see through you, as he saw through me. But if you speak the truth, if you offer him the only thing he truly wants. And what is that? Matteo lowered his hand. Forgiveness, he said. He wants someone to forgive him. For what he has become. For the monster he has made of himself. He has been so consumed by his grief that he has forgotten what it feels like to be loved. Elena felt tears well in her eyes. She blinked them back, her jaw set with determination. I'll do it, she said. I'll speak the words. I'll offer him forgiveness. Matteo nodded slowly. Then go, Professor. Go before I die, so that I can die knowing that someone finally listened. Chapter 9. Requiem for Sinners. The La Speranza lay on her side at the bottom of the Tyrrhenian Sea, her hull a twisted skeleton of rust and coral. She had been there for 64 years, and the sea had claimed her in every way that mattered. Her paint was gone, her decks were carpeted with silt, and her portholes stared out like the hollow eye sockets of a skull. But inside, she was alive. Masha had been here for 2 days. She had lost count of the hours, lost all sense of time and direction. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint glow of bioluminescent creatures that drifted through the flooded corridors like tiny stars. She was not afraid. The others, the ones the creature had brought here before her, were afraid. They huddled in the air pockets, the pockets of oxygen that had been trapped in the ship's upper decks when it sank. They were a strange congregation. Alexei Kovalenko, the Ukrainian, his eyes red from crying. The Egyptian, who had been a mafia boss in Cairo. The 2 women, the prostitutes, who now held on to each other like sisters. And a dozen others, faces she had seen in the darkness but could not quite remember. They were all sinners. Masha could feel it, not as a judgment but as a texture, a weight in the air. Alexei's sin was a cold, greasy film on her skin. The Egyptian's was a hot, coppery taste in her mouth. The women's was a cloying sweetness, like rotting flowers. But Masha herself was clean. She knew this because the sea had told her. The dolphins, the ones who had saved her from drowning, had communicated with her in images and feelings. They had shown her the creature, the great octopus that lived in the wreck. They had shown her his grief, his endless, aching grief for the mate and the child he had lost. And they had shown her that she was different. "You're pure," the dolphins had said, not in words but in a current of understanding. "You're the only one who doesn't smell like guilt. That's why he hasn't hurt you." Masha had accepted this with the simple faith of a 12-year-old. She had known from a young age that she was different. She could hear things that others couldn't, feel things that others couldn't. Her mother had called it a gift. Her father had called it a curse. She had just called it being herself. Now she sat in the darkness of the wreck, her back against a rusted bulkhead, and she listened. The creature was singing. Not to her, not directly. He was singing to the others, the sinners. And his song was a requiem. It was the sound of their sins, woven into a tapestry of accusation and regret. Each of them heard a different melody. Alexei heard the screams of the people he had sold. The Egyptian heard the pleas of his victims. The prostitutes heard the sobs of the old men they had defrauded. But Masha heard something else. She heard the creature's own grief, the song he had been singing for 100 years. It was a song of loss, of loneliness, of a love that had been torn away by a young man's fear. It was the most beautiful and terrible thing she had ever heard. And she knew, with a certainty that came from the very core of her being, that she was the only one who could answer it. Chapter 10. The First Shock. The submersible was called Aurora, a sleek, one-person vessel that looked like a silver teardrop. It had been Elena's dream project, a vehicle designed to explore the deepest parts of the Mediterranean without the constraints of traditional diving equipment. She had never expected to use it for this. The descent took 27 minutes. Elena sat in the tiny cockpit, her hands steady on the controls, watching the depth gauge climb. 50 meters, 100, 200, 300. The light faded from blue to indigo to black, and then the sonar picked up the wreck. L'Esperanza materialized on the screen like a ghost from the abyss. She was larger than Elena had expected, nearly 200 meters long. Her superstructure collapsed, but her hull still intact. The sonar showed movement, not just fish, but something larger, something that moved with a purpose that was almost human. The octopus. Elena's heart pounded as she guided the Aurora toward the wreck. She could see it now, through the forward viewport, a massive shape that blotted out the dim light. It was enormous, far larger than any octopus she had ever seen. Its mantle alone was the size of a small car, and its tentacles stretched out into the darkness like the roots of an ancient tree. She had only one weapon, the Zagavor. Father Vasily's voice echoed in her memory as she opened the submersible's external speakers. The words were strange on her tongue, the old Slavonic consonants clicking and rolling in ways that felt unnatural. But she spoke them anyway, with all the conviction she could muster. Simenem okiana, skroviu glubini. The creature turned toward her. Its eye, a dark orb the size of a dinner plate, fixed on the submersible with an intelligence that made Elena's blood run cold. It was not a predator's gaze. It was something far more frightening. It was the gaze of a judge. Silitmi I sveta, što spit na dnie morja. The octopus moved closer. Elena could see the texture of its skin now, the mottled pattern of dark red and brown, the tiny suckers that lined its tentacles. It was beautiful, in a terrible way. And it was far more powerful than she had ever imagined. Чтобы услышали голос наш в глубине. The creature's tentacles reached out, wrapping around the submersible with a gentleness that surprised Elena. She felt the hull creak, the metal protesting against the immense pressure. But the creature was not trying to crush her. It was trying to communicate. And in that moment, Elena understood. The Zagavor had worked. The creature had heard her, and it was asking her a question. Not in words, not in sounds, but in a wave of feeling that washed over her like the tide. Why are you here? Elena closed her eyes, gathering her courage. She thought of Matteo, of his confession, of the sin that had set all of this in motion. She thought of the sinners in the wreck, their guilt, their fear. And she thought of Masha, the child who was somehow pure, the child who had been taken but not broken. I'm here to help you, she said, her voice trembling. I'm here to tell you that you don't have to be alone anymore. The creature was silent, its eye fixed on her. Then it released the submersible and retreated into the darkness, leaving Elena alone in the cold, silent abyss. But she had seen something in that moment, something that gave her hope. In the creature's eye, there had been the faintest glimmer of something she had not expected. Longing. Chapter 11. The Cry Inside the Bubble. The air in the wreck's hold was thick and stale, a mixture of salt, rust, and the sour sweat of human fear. Masha sat in the corner, her knees drawn up to her chest, watching the others as they drifted in and out of consciousness. There were 13 of them now, 13 sinners trapped in a metal coffin at the bottom of the sea. Alexei Kovalenko was the loudest. He had been crying for hours, his face streaked with tears and snot, his expensive suit torn and stained. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and barrel-chested, but he looked small now, reduced to a trembling child by the weight of his guilt. Please, he kept saying, his voice cracking. Please, I'll give you anything. I have money. I have so much money. Just let me go. The creature did not answer. It never answered. But Masha could hear it. Not with her ears. The creature was somewhere in the depths, far below the air pocket where the humans huddled. She could hear it with her mind. A low, rumbling hum that vibrated through the water and up through the rusted hull. The creature was singing. And as it sang, Alexei's eyes went wide. He stopped crying, stopped begging, and his face went slack with a terrible realization. He was seeing something. A memory, a vision, a moment from his past that he had tried to forget. No, he whispered. No, not that. Please, not that. Masha watched as he slumped forward, his body going limp. The memory had taken him, consumed him, forced him to relive the worst moment of his life. She had seen it happen to the others too, the Egyptian, the 2 women, the African guard. Each of them had been forced to confront their sins, to feel the pain they had caused as if it were their own. But Alexei's memory was different. Masha could feel it leaking from him like a wound. It was the memory of a woman, a young woman with dark hair and sad eyes. She was in a room, a small room with no windows, and she was crying. There were children in the background, 2 children, a boy and a girl, their faces smudged with tears. "Please," the woman was saying, "please, I'll do anything. Just let them go." And Alexei was there, his face cold and hard, his voice flat with indifference. "The deal is the deal. You signed the contract. You owe the debt." The woman screamed, the children screamed, and then the memory faded, leaving Alexei on the floor of the wreck, his body racked with sobs. Masha felt a surge of pity despite everything. She knew what Alexei had done. She had felt the cold, greasy film of his sin, the trafficking of human souls for profit. But she also felt his pain, his genuine, gut-wrenching remorse. He was not a monster. He was just a man who had made terrible choices, and the creature was making him live with those choices. Masha stood up, her legs shaky from hours of sitting. She walked across the hold, stepping carefully over the other bodies, and knelt beside Alexei. He looked up at her, his eyes red and swollen. "You're the girl," he said, his voice hoarse. "The Russian girl. I saw you on the news." "I'm Masha," she said softly. "What did you see?" Alexei shook his head, a fresh wave of tears streaming down his face. "I saw her, the woman I sold. She had children, Masha. She had 2 beautiful children, and I took them away from her. I took everything." Masha reached out, her small hand resting on his. She was not afraid of him, not anymore. He had been broken, hollowed out by the creature's song, and there was nothing left in him but regret. "It's okay," she said. "It's okay to feel this. It's okay to be sorry." Alexei stared at her, his expression one of disbelief. "How can you be so calm? You're trapped here, just like us. You could die here." Masha smiled, a faint, sad smile. "I'm not going to die. The creature doesn't want me to die. He wants me to help." "Help?" Alexei's voice was bitter. "Help who? Help the people he's torturing?" "Help him," Masha said. "Help him find peace." Chapter 12. The Acoustic Boarding. On the surface, the storm was building. Elena sat in the lighthouse laboratory, her eyes fixed on the sonar display. The wreck of the La Speranza was a ghost on the screen, a faint outline of rust and decay. But there was movement around it, a swirling mass of shapes that moved with an eerie coordination. The dolphins. They had been gathering for days, dozens of them, circling the wreck like guardians. Elena had counted at least 40 individuals, and the number was growing. They were speaking to each other in a symphony of clicks and whistles, and Elena had been recording them obsessively. But it was not the dolphins that worried her. It was the octopus. She had seen it once, in the brief glimpse she had caught through the Aurora's viewport. It had been massive, far larger than any known species of enteroctopus. Its skin had been a mottled pattern of dark red and brown, and its eyes had glowed with an intelligence that was almost human. Now, as she watched the sonar, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The octopus was moving. Not in the slow, deliberate way it had been moving before. No, this was different. It was rising, ascending from the depths with a speed that seemed impossible for a creature of its size. The sonar showed its shape, a great teardrop of flesh and tentacles, and it was moving toward the surface. "What is it doing?" Rosa asked, standing behind her. "Is it coming for us?" Elena shook her head slowly. "I don't think so. I think it's responding to something." The sonar screen flickered, and Elena saw it. A second ship, smaller than the La Speranza, approaching the area at speed. It was a naval vessel, a patrol boat from the Italian Navy, and it was armed. "Tell me you didn't authorize this," Elena said, her voice tight. Rosa's face went pale. "I didn't. This must be—" She grabbed her radio, speaking rapidly in Italian. There was a pause, a crackle of static, and then a voice came back, calm and professional. "Naval Command reports a coordinated strike. They're planning to destroy the wreck to eliminate the threat." Elena's blood went cold. "No, they can't. There are people down there, survivors." Rosa nodded, already reaching for her phone. "I'll call the commissario, but we can't stop them, Elena. The Navy has jurisdiction in international waters." "Then we have to get there first." Elena grabbed her coat, her mind racing. "I'm going out in the Aurora. I'm going to put myself between them and the wreck." Rosa grabbed her arm. "That's suicide. The Aurora isn't armored. One torpedo and you're dead." Elena pulled free, her eyes blazing. "I'll take that risk, because if they blow up that wreck, they'll kill everyone down there, and I'm not going to let that happen." Chapter 13. Conversations with a Dolphin. In the depths of the wreck, Masha felt the vibration. It was a change in the creature's song, a new note that had not been there before. It was sharp and urgent, like a cry of warning. And as the note echoed through the water, the dolphins began to move. They came flooding into the hold through a breach in the hull, a river of sleek grey bodies that swam with the grace of dancers. Masha watched them, her heart pounding, as they circled the trapped humans, herding them toward a narrow passageway. "What's happening?" Alexei shouted, his voice high with panic. "What are they doing?" Masha closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind. The dolphins were speaking to her, their thoughts a torrent of images and feelings. She saw an explosion, a wall of fire, the wreck collapsing in on itself. She saw the creature, the great octopus, rising to meet the threat. And she saw the ship on the surface, the naval vessel, its cannons trained on the deep. "They're going to destroy the wreck," Masha said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. "The Navy is going to blow us up." "Then we have to get out," Alexei said. "We have to swim for it." Masha shook her head. "We can't. The pressure would kill us. We're too deep." The dolphins nudged her, their bodies warm and reassuring. They had a plan, a way to save them. But it required something that Masha was not sure she could do. She had to speak to the creature. "Take me to him," she said, her voice firm. "Take me to the octopus." The dolphins responded immediately, circling around her and guiding her toward the passageway. Masha took a deep breath and dove, her body cutting through the water with surprising ease. The passageway was dark, lit only by the bioluminescence of the creatures that lived in the wreck. Masha swam through it, her lungs burning, her heart pounding. And then she emerged into a vast chamber, a cathedral of rust and coral where the creature waited. The octopus was even larger than she had imagined. Its body filled the chamber, its tentacles stretching out into the darkness like the roots of an ancient tree. Its eye, a dark orb the size of a dinner plate, fixed on her with an intensity that made her shiver. But Masha was not afraid. She knew that the creature was not a monster. He was a mourner, a being consumed by grief. And she knew, with a certainty that came from the very core of her being, that she was the only one who could reach him. "Zagovor," she said softly, speaking the words that Elena had taught her. "Simenem okiana, skroviu glubini." The creature's eye widened. He had heard the words before, long ago, in a time before his grief. And as Masha spoke them, he remembered. He remembered the love he had lost, the mate, the child, the life that had been stolen from him by a young man's fear. He remembered the rage, the endless rage that had consumed him, turning him into a hunter of sinners. But he also remembered the peace. Masha reached out, her small hand resting on the creature's mantle. His skin was warm, soft, and she could feel the pulse of his heart beneath it. She looked into his eye, and she spoke the words of forgiveness. "It's okay," she said. "It's okay to let go. You've been holding on to this for so long, but you don't have to hurt anymore." The creature's song changed. It was a new note, a note of surrender, a note of acceptance. He had been carrying his grief for a century, and he was tired, so tired. And in this moment, with this child who had no sin, he found the strength to let go. The chamber began to fill with light. Chapter 14. The Judgment of the Old Man. On the beach at Pili, Matteo Bellini heard the note. It was not the si bemol that had haunted him for 99 years. It was something new, something softer, something that sounded almost like a lullaby. And he understood. The creature had forgiven him. After all these years, after all the suffering, the creature had let go of his rage. And with it, Matteo felt the weight of his own sin begin to lift. He rose from his chair, his old bones creaking, and walked to the window. He could not see the sea. He had been blind for a decade, but he could feel it. He could feel the waves, the rhythm of the tides, the pulse of the deep. And he could feel the creature. "He's coming," Matteo said, his voice barely a whisper. "He's coming to say goodbye." The door opened, and Elena Visconti appeared. She was soaking wet, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes wide with shock. She had come from the sea, from the wreck, from the chamber where Masha had spoken the words of forgiveness. "Matteo," she said, "he's here. The octopus. He's right outside." Matteo nodded slowly. "I know. I've been waiting for him." He walked to the door, his steps slow and deliberate. Elena followed him, her heart pounding. They emerged onto the beach, the wind whipping around them, and there, in the shallows, was the creature. The octopus was enormous, its body filling the water like a small island. Its tentacles stretched out, reaching for Matteo, and its eye fixed on him with a gaze that was no longer angry. It was sad, weary, and it was forgiving. Matteo waded into the water, his old legs trembling. He reached out, his gnarled hand touching the creature's mantle. And in that moment, he felt the creature's grief. A grief that had been carried for a century. A grief that was finally being released. "I'm sorry," Matteo said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I was a coward. I was afraid. And I took everything from you." The creature's tentacle wrapped around him, gentle and warm. It was not an attack. It was an embrace. And then the creature sang. It was not the song of judgment. It was the song of farewell. And as it sang, Matteo Bellini felt the weight of his sin lift from his shoulders. He felt the peace that had eluded him for nearly a century. He smiled. And then he died. Chapter 15. The Kaleidoscope of Crimes. Elena stood on the beach, watching the creature retreat into the deep. Matteo's body lay in the shallows, his face peaceful, his eyes closed. He had been waiting for this moment for 99 years, and now, finally, he had found his rest. But there was no time to mourn. There was work to be done. The survivors of the wreck were being brought ashore by the dolphins, their bodies battered but alive. Alexei Kovalenko was among them, his face streaked with tears. He was changed. Elena could see that. The experience had broken something in him, but it had also rebuilt something. He was no longer the same man. Rosa Mandelli approached, her expression grim. "We've identified the other survivors. The Egyptian, a former mafia boss. The two women, the prostitutes. The African guard from the Libyan camp. And others. A German businessman, a French politician, a Greek shipping magnate. All of them have one thing in common. Elena nodded. They're all sinners. They're all criminals, Rosa corrected. Every single one of them has been wanted by Interpol or their home countries for serious crimes. The octopus didn't just take random people, it took the worst of the worst. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The creature had been conducting its own investigation, its own form of justice, and it had been doing it for decades. What about the bodies? Elena asked. The ones that were found on the beach? Rosa shook her head. No new bodies. The creature seems to have stopped its attacks. For now, at least. Elena looked out at the sea, the grey waves stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The creature was still out there, somewhere in the deep. She could feel its presence, a faint pulse in the water. But it was no longer hunting. It was mourning. Find me a list of everyone who disappeared in this area over the past 50 years, Elena said. I need to know how many people the creature took. I need to understand its mission. Rosa nodded and walked away, leaving Elena alone on the beach. The wind howled and the sea churned, and Elena felt the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her. The creature had been a judge, a collector of sins, a force of nature that had been set in motion by a single act of cruelty. And it had taken hundreds of lives. But it had also created something else. It had created a reckoning. Chapter 16. The Hospital. The survivors were brought to a makeshift hospital in the old fishing warehouse on the Pili waterfront. It was a chaotic scene, doctors and nurses rushing back and forth, the wounded crying out in pain, the families of the missing demanding answers. But Masha was calm. She sat in a corner of the warehouse, her small body wrapped in a thermal blanket, her eyes distant. She had been through something that no one else could understand, something that had changed her in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. Elena found her there, sitting alone in the chaos. Masha, she said softly, kneeling beside her. Are you okay? Masha looked up, her dark eyes meeting Eleanor's. I heard him, she said. The creature. He was singing. And I understood him. Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. What did he say? Masha was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. He said that we're all part of the same song. Every single one of us. The good ones and the bad ones. And when we hurt each other, it's like a wrong note. It breaks the harmony. Eleanor sat down beside her, her heart heavy. That's beautiful, she said, and terrifying. Masha nodded. He's not a monster. He's just sad. So sad. He wanted to make people feel what he felt. The pain of losing someone you love. Eleanor reached out, her hand finding Masha's. You helped him. You helped him let go of that pain. I tried, Masha said. I spoke the words, the old words, and he listened. But I don't know if he's really free. He's still out there somewhere, and I think he's waiting. Waiting for what? Masha looked up, her eyes meeting Eleanor's with an intensity that was unsettling for a child her age. Waiting for someone to sing with him. He's been singing alone for so long. He needs someone to join the song. Chapter 17. The Police Strike Back. The operation was doomed from the start. Marco Ricci had insisted on a coordinated strike, a plan to destroy the wreck of the La Speranza and eliminate the threat once and for all. He had argued that the creature was too dangerous, too unpredictable, and that the only way to ensure the safety of Pili and its people was to annihilate it. Eleanor had argued against him. She had told him about the survivors, about the healing that had begun, about the creature's shift from judgment to mourning. She had begged him to wait, to give the creature a chance to leave on its own. But Marco had not listened. Now, as the naval patrol boat approached the wreck, Eleanor watched from the shore, her heart in her throat. The sonar showed the creature, still present, still deep, its song a low, mournful hum. "They're going to do it," Rosa said, standing beside her. "They're going to blow it up." "Not if I can stop them." Eleanor grabbed her radio, her hand shaking. "Marco, can you hear me? Marco, call them off. The creature isn't a threat anymore. It's leaving." The radio crackled, and Marco's voice came back, sharp and impatient. "I can't take that risk, Eleanor. This thing has killed dozens of people. It's a menace." "It's a thinking being," Eleanor shouted. "It has emotions, it has history, it has pain. You can't just destroy it like it's a piece of garbage." "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I have to do what's right for Pilly." The line went dead. Eleanor turned to Rosa, her eyes blazing with anger and despair. "We have to stop them. We have to do something." Rosa looked at her, her expression one of grim determination. "I know a way, but you're not going to like it." Chapter 18. The Revelation of the Mermaids. In the deep, in the chamber of rust and coral, the creature was singing. But it was not alone anymore. The mermaids had come. They emerged from the darkness like ghosts, their bodies sleek and luminous, their eyes ancient and knowing. They were the guardians of the deep, the keepers of the balance, and they had come to witness the end of a journey that had begun a century ago. Masha watched them from the doorway of the chamber, her heart swelling with wonder. They were beautiful, far more beautiful than she had ever imagined. Their skin glowed with a soft, pearlescent light, and their hair floated around them like clouds of kelp. They were singing too, singing in harmony with the creature, their voices weaving together into a tapestry of sound that filled the deep. "You have done well, child," one of them said, her voice echoing in Masha's mind. "You have shown him what he had forgotten." "Forgotten?" Masha asked. "Forgotten what?" The mermaid smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Forgotten that he was once loved. Forgotten that the sea is not just a place of pain, but a place of healing. You have reminded him of the melody." Masha nodded slowly. "What happens now? What happens to him?" The mermaid turned to look at the creature, her expression one of infinite compassion. "He will leave. He will go to the deep places, the places where no one will find him, and he will heal." "And the others?" Masha asked. "The ones he took? What will happen to them?" The mermaid was quiet for a moment. "They will be changed. Some of them will spend the rest of their lives trying to make amends. Others will never recover. But all of them will carry the memory of what they saw, what they felt. They will carry the song." Chapter 19. The Dream of Reason. That night, as the survivors slept in the warehouse, they dreamed. They dreamed of the creature, of its journey through the deep, of the love it had lost and the grief it had carried for so long. They dreamed of the mermaids, of their ancient wisdom, of the balance they had kept for millennia. They dreamed of the sea, of its endless depths, of its hidden truths, and they dreamed of themselves. Each survivor saw their own face, their own sins, their own moments of cruelty and selfishness. They saw the people they had hurt, the lives they had broken, the world they had helped to destroy. But they also saw something else. They saw the possibility of change. Alexei Kovalenko saw himself giving up his fortune, using it to help the people he had trafficked. The Egyptian saw himself confessing to his crimes, accepting punishment with humility. The prostitutes saw themselves walking away from their past, starting new lives. And Masha saw herself standing on a cliff, looking out at the sea, singing the song of forgiveness. Chapter 20. The Choice of the Octopus. The creature was at a crossroads. He had come to the edge of the abyss, the place where the seafloor dropped away into darkness. He had been here before, a century ago, when his grief had been fresh and his rage had been white-hot. He had descended into the abyss, determined to never return. But now, something was different. The child's voice was in his mind, a gentle melody that soothed his pain. The mermaid's song was in his heart, a harmony that reminded him of the beauty of the world. And the old man's confession was in his soul, a release of the guilt that had bound him for so long. He could continue his mission. He could hunt the sinners, judge them, punish them. He could carry on the work he had started. Or he could let go. He could release the survivors, let them return to the surface. He could swim into the abyss and leave the world of men behind. He could heal, slowly over the centuries, until the memory of his loss was no longer a wound, but a scar. He looked up at the surface, where the light was waiting. He looked down at the abyss, where the darkness was calling. And he made his choice. Chapter 21. Operation Amnesia. The chamber was filling with water. Masha felt it rising around her ankles, then her knees, then her waist. The dolphins were circling, their bodies a blur of grey against the bioluminescent glow. They were singing, their voices a complex harmony that seemed to resonate in her very bones. But the song was different now. It was softer, gentler, a lullaby that seemed to soothe the very fabric of the wreck. The creature had heard it, and his response was slow, deliberate. He was releasing his grip on the barriers he had maintained for so long, letting the water flow through the passageways of the La Speranza. "He's letting us go," Alexei said, his voice trembling with disbelief. "He's actually letting us go." Masha nodded, her hand still resting on the creature's mantle. She could feel his pulse, slow and steady, a rhythm that was no longer filled with rage. He had made his choice, and now he was following through. "Don't be afraid," she said, her voice carrying across the water. "The dolphins will guide you. Just breathe and trust them." The survivors looked at her, their faces a mixture of fear and hope. They had been through so much, had seen so much, and now they were being offered a chance to return to the world they had left behind. But they were not the same people. Masha could feel it, the change that had taken root in each of them. The guilt was still there, a heavy weight in their souls, but it was no longer consuming them. It was a burden they could carry, a lesson they could learn from. "Go," she said. "Go now. And when you reach the surface, remember what you have seen. Remember what you have felt. And let it change you." The dolphins began to herd them toward the passageway, their movements gentle but insistent. One by one, the survivors dove into the water and swam toward the light. Masha stayed behind. She looked up at the creature, his great eye fixed on her with an expression she could not quite read. It was not sorrow, not anymore. It was something else, something that looked almost like gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for letting them go." The creature did not speak, but his song changed. It became a single note, a clear, pure tone that vibrated through the water like a bell. It was the sound of farewell. And then he turned and swam into the abyss. Masha watched him go, her heart aching with a sadness she could not quite explain. She had only known him for a short time, but she felt as though she had known him forever. He was a part of her now, a part of the song that would always play in her heart. The dolphins nudged her gently, guiding her toward the surface. She took a deep breath and swam. Chapter 22. The Resurfacing. The first person to break the surface was Alexei Kovalenko. He emerged gasping, his lungs burning, his eyes wide with shock. The sea was calm now, the storm having passed, and the grey sky stretched above him like a cathedral ceiling. He was alive. The dolphins surrounded him, their bodies warm and reassuring. They guided him toward the shore, where a crowd had gathered: police, medics, journalists, and the families of the missing. Alexei stumbled onto the beach, his legs weak and trembling. He fell to his knees in the sand, his hands clutching at the earth as though he had forgotten what solid ground felt like. "Alexei!" a voice called out, and he looked up to see a man in a suit rushing toward him. It was his lawyer, a sleek, polished figure who had always been there to fix his problems. "Mr. Kovalenko, thank God you're alive. We need to get you to a hospital. We need to—" "No." Alexei's voice was hoarse, but it carried a conviction that silenced his lawyer. "I'm not going anywhere." The lawyer blinked. "I don't understand." "I understand." Alexei looked up at him, his eyes red but clear. "I understand everything now. The people I sold, the families I destroyed, the debt I owe." His lawyer's face went pale. "Mr. Kovalenko, perhaps we should discuss this privately. There are—" "Now." Alexei pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. "I want to make a statement. Right now, in front of everyone." The journalists surged forward, their cameras clicking, their microphones extended. Alexei faced them, his expression one of grim determination. "My name is Alexei Kovalenko," he said, his voice carrying across the beach. "I am a human trafficker. I have sold dozens of people, destroyed countless lives, and profited from the misery of others. I am guilty of terrible crimes." The crowd fell silent, stunned by his confession. "And I will do everything in my power to make amends," Alexei continued. "I will give up my fortune. I will donate every penny to organizations that help the victims of trafficking. I will cooperate with any investigation. I will accept whatever punishment the law deems appropriate." He paused, tears streaming down his face. "Because I have seen what I have done. I have felt the pain I have caused, and I will never, ever be that person again." Over the next hour, the other survivors emerged from the sea. The Egyptian mafia boss knelt on the sand and confessed to his crimes, his voice raw with remorse. The two women, the prostitutes, fell into the arms of the elderly couples they had defrauded, begging for forgiveness. The African guard, Kwame, who had been voiceless just days before, found his voice again and spoke of the horrors he had witnessed and perpetrated. Each confession was different, but they all shared one thing: the recognition of their own sins, the acknowledgement of the harm they had caused, and the determination to change. Elena watched from the edge of the crowd, her heart full to bursting. The survivors were broken, yes, but they were also healing. And in their healing, they were offering the world a glimpse of something that was desperately needed: redemption. Chapter 23. The Appearance of Masha. The crowd had swelled to hundreds by the time Masha emerged from the water. She rose from the waves like a spirit, her dark hair plastered to her face, her small body silhouetted against the grey sky. She was riding on the back of a dolphin, her hands gripping its dorsal fin, her face serene. The cameras turned to her. The crowd fell silent. Masha slid from the dolphin's back and waded onto the beach, her feet sinking into the wet sand. The dolphin circled once, then dove back into the sea, disappearing into the depths. "Masha!" A woman's voice cut through the silence, high and desperate. It was her mother, a tall, elegant woman who had been pacing the beach for days, her face ravaged by worry. She rushed forward, gathering her daughter into her arms, sobbing with relief. "Masha, my baby, my little girl." "I'm okay, Mama." Masha's voice was calm, almost eerily so. "I'm okay. He didn't hurt me. He just wanted to talk." Her mother pulled back, her eyes searching her daughter's face. "Talk? Who wanted to talk? Masha looked up at the sea, her expression distant. The octopus. He was sad, Mama. So sad. He lost his family a long time ago, and he's been hurting ever since. But I helped him. I helped him let go. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. The journalists pressed closer, their questions overlapping. Elena pushed through the throng, her heart pounding. She reached Masha and knelt beside her, taking her small hands in hers. "What did you do?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What did you say to him?" Masha looked at her, her dark eyes shining with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. "I told him he wasn't alone. I told him that the sea loves him, and that he could let go of his pain. I sang the words, Professor, the old words." Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. "The Zagavor. You spoke the incantation." "I spoke it from my heart," Masha said, "and he heard me." Chapter 24. The Last Beat. The funeral of Matteo Bellini was held on the beach where he had killed the mermaid a century ago. It was a small ceremony, attended only by Elena, Masha, and a few of the old fishermen who remembered the man Matteo had been. They laid his body in a simple pine coffin, painted blue like the sea he had loved and feared. Father Vasily presided over the service, his voice low and melodic as he spoke the words of the Orthodox burial liturgy. Elena stood at the edge of the crowd, her hand clasped in Masha's, watching the waves break on the shore. "He was a sinner," Elena said softly, "but he was also a victim. He made a terrible choice when he was young, and it haunted him for the rest of his life." Masha nodded. "He was afraid. That's why he did it. He was afraid of what people would think. And in the end, he found peace." Elena squeezed her hand. "The creature forgave him." The coffin was lowered into the grave, and the fishermen began to shovel sand over it. Elena turned away, her eyes blurry with tears. And then she saw it. In the shallows, just beyond the breakers, a shape was moving. It was large, larger than any fish, and it seemed to be watching them. The octopus. Elena froze, her breath catching in her throat. The creature had returned, not to hunt, but to pay its respects. Masha tugged at her hand. "He came to say goodbye, to Matteo." Elena watched as the creature extended one of its tentacles, reaching toward the grave. It hovered there for a moment, suspended in the air, and then it withdrew. The creature sang one last time. It was a single note, low and clear, a note that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of everyone who heard it. It was a note of farewell, of forgiveness, of peace. And then the creature sank beneath the waves and disappeared. Chapter 25. The Scientific Breakthrough. Elena's paper was published in Nature 6 months later. It was titled Bioacoustic Mechanisms of Conscience Induction in Cephalopods, and it was the most controversial scientific work of the decade. In it, Elena detailed her findings, the frequencies, the resonance patterns, the evidence that the octopus had been using sound to induce guilt and repentance in its victims. The scientific community was divided. Some hailed her as a genius, a pioneer who had unlocked the secrets of interspecies communication. Others dismissed her as a fraud, a charlatan who had fabricated evidence to support a sensationalist narrative. But the survivors' testimonies were impossible to ignore. Alexei Kovalenko had already donated $3 billion to anti-trafficking organizations and was working with Interpol to dismantle the networks he had once profited from. The Egyptian mafia boss had turned himself in and was cooperating with authorities. The two women had started a foundation to help elderly victims of financial exploitation. They were living proof that the creature's judgment had not been merely punitive, it had been transformative. The Italian government is trying to suppress the research, Rosa Mandelli told Elena one evening, handing her a glass of wine. They don't want to admit that a mollusk has a better moral compass than half of their politicians. Elena laughed, a bitter sound. They can suppress it all they want. The truth is out there. The survivors are speaking. The dolphins are still here. And somewhere in the deep, the creature is healing. Do you think he'll ever come back? Rosa asked. Elena looked out at the sea, the grey waves stretching endlessly toward the horizon. I don't know, but I hope so. I hope he'll come back to remind us that the sea is listening, that we can't hide from what we've done. Chapter 26. The Parade of Redemption. The survivors organised a procession through the streets of Pili. It was a strange sight, a parade of sinners walking through the town with their heads held high, confessing their crimes to anyone who would listen. They wore white, a symbol of their cleansing, and they carried seashells in their hands. The townspeople lined the streets, watching with a mixture of awe and discomfort. Some cheered, others jeered, but no one could deny the power of what they were seeing. Alexei led the procession, his face calm and serene. He had changed his entire life, shedding the weight of his wealth and status like a snake shedding its skin. He was no longer the oligarch's son, the trafficker, the monster. He was simply Alexei, a man who had been broken and rebuilt. The Egyptian walked behind him, his hands clasped in front of him, his eyes downcast. He had confessed to crimes that would keep him in prison for the rest of his life, but he had done so willingly, accepting his punishment with a grace that surprised everyone. The two women walked together, their arms linked, their faces radiant with hope. They had found a new purpose, a new mission, and they were determined to spend the rest of their lives making amends. And at the back of the procession, walking alone, was Masha. She was 12 years old, but she walked with the poise and dignity of someone who had seen the face of eternity. She held a small seashell in her hand, and she was humming softly, a melody that no one recognized, but that seemed to resonate in the hearts of all who heard it. "Who is that girl?" someone in the crowd asked. "She's the one who talked to the creature," another replied. "The one who saved them." Masha did not look at them. Her eyes were fixed on the sea, where a faint glimmer of bioluminescence was visible in the depths. The creature was watching, and he was singing. Chapter 27. Masha's Voice. The final scene took place on the cliff above Pili, the same cliff where Matteo Bellini had stood a century ago, watching the mermaids struggle in the nets. Masha stood there now, her small figure silhouetted against the setting sun. The sea spread out before her, a tapestry of orange and gold, and the wind was soft and warm, carrying the scent of salt and freedom. Her mother stood a few paces behind her, watching with a mixture of pride and worry. She had seen her daughter change over the past year, had watched her grow wiser and more distant, as though she carried a secret that could not be shared. "What do you hear?" her mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Masha closed her eyes, her face turned toward the sea. She listened, really listens, to the rhythm of the waves, the cry of the gulls, the distant hum of the wind. And then she heard it. The song. It was not the song of the creature, not anymore. It was something greater, something that encompassed everything. The sea, the sky, the earth, the stars. It was a symphony of existence, a harmony that had been playing since the beginning of time. "He's singing," Masha said, her voice soft but clear. "The whole world is singing." Everything has a voice, Mama. The waves, the wind, the fish in the deep. It's all one song. Her mother stepped closer, her hand finding her daughter's shoulder. And what does the song say? Masha opened her eyes and looked at her mother, her gaze filled with a wisdom that belied her years. It says we are all connected, every single one of us. The good ones and the bad ones, the happy ones and the sad ones. We're all part of the same melody. She paused, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. And it says that even when we make mistakes, even when we sing the wrong notes, we can always find our way back. We can always start again. The sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and rose. The sea was calm, peaceful, a mirror of the heavens. Masha raised her hand to her lips and blew a kiss toward the water. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for letting me hear the song." The dolphins answered her, their calls rising from the depths like a chorus of angels. And somewhere in the abyss, the creature sang one last note, a note of peace, of acceptance, of hope. The note hung in the air for a moment, and then it faded into the silence. The world was still, the sea was quiet, and the song went on. 10 years later. The laboratory was quiet, filled with the gentle hum of filtration systems and the soft glow of blue light from the aquariums. Masha stood at the central tank, her hand resting on the glass. She was 22 now, tall and slender, with the same dark eyes that had seen the face of the abyss. She wore a white lab coat over a simple dress, and her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She had kept her promise. She had become a professor of bioacoustics, following in Elena Visconti's footsteps, dedicating her life to understanding the language of the sea. Her research had been groundbreaking, her papers widely cited, her theories challenging the very foundations of marine biology. But her greatest achievement was still the creature. He had never returned to Pili, not in the years since that fateful November. But Masha knew he was out there, somewhere in the deep places, his song a constant hum in the fabric of the ocean. She had felt him, sometimes, when she was listening to her hydrophones, a low, resonant note, always the same, si bemol. But it was no longer a note of sorrow. It was a note of contentment, of belonging, of home. In the tank before her, a small octopus was drawing on the glass. It was a young enter-octopus, barely a year old, but it was already showing signs of remarkable intelligence. It had been found in a tide pool near Pili, injured and alone, and Masha had nursed it back to health. Now it was drawing patterns on the glass, spirals and curves that seemed to follow a mathematical logic. Masha watched, fascinated, as the octopus traced a series of lines that looked almost like musical notes. "What are you trying to tell me?" she whispered. The octopus paused, its small eye fixed on her, and then it drew a single, perfect circle, a symbol of completeness, of wholeness. Masha smiled. She turned away from the tank and walked to the window, where the Mediterranean stretched out before her, endless and eternal. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. And there, on the horizon, she saw him. A dark shape, barely visible against the fading light, moving through the water with a grace that could only belong to one creature. The Il Cucitore, the sewer, the old one. He had returned. Masha raised her hand, a gesture of greeting, of recognition, and she sang, a single note that carried across the water, a note that she had learned from the dolphins, from the mermaids, from the creature himself. Si bemol. The creature answered, his voice rising from the depths, a deep, resonant hum that shook the very air. It was not a song of judgment. It was not a song of sorrow. It was a song of peace, of connection, of the endless, beautiful symphony of life. Masha lowered her hand, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "Welcome home," she whispered. "Welcome home, old friend." And in the fading light, the creature turned and swam into the sunset, his song a promise of hope that would echo through eternity. Chapter 28. The Echo and the Answer. 1 year later, Pili, December. The sea remembered. Masha knew this because she could feel it in her bones, the same low thrum that had once been a curse, a note of sorrow, now pulsed with something gentler. Si bemol no longer came as a haunting. It arrived like a greeting, a familiar voice calling across the water. She had not returned to the abyss. She had not needed to. The old octopus had given her his gift, not in words, but in a flood of images and understanding that had settled into her mind like a second language. She now heard the ocean not as a collection of sounds, but as a living conversation. Every wave carried a syllable, every current hummed a phrase, and in that conversation she had found her purpose. Her mother had wept when Masha told her she would not go back to school, not to the ordinary one at least. Instead, she had enrolled in Elena Visconti's program at the University of Genoa, a specialized track in bioacoustics that had been created in the wake of the Pili incident. Masha was the youngest student ever accepted, and already her research notes were attracting attention from marine biologists around the world. But it was not the science that consumed her. It was the singing. Every evening she would stand on the cliff and hum the ancient Zagavor, not aloud, but inside her mind, projecting the frequencies that the dolphins had taught her. And sometimes, when the conditions were right, she would hear an answer. A distant, rumbling note from the deep, too low for human ears, but perfectly clear to her. The old one was still there. He had not left. He had merely withdrawn, becoming a silent guardian, a keeper of the balance. And now, he was calling her to the surface of a different kind of abyss, the abyss of human indifference. 6 months later, Masha stood before a gathering of the world's most influential marine biologists, policymakers, and ethicists. The conference was held in Geneva, a sterile city of glass and steel, far from the salt and wind of Pili. But the subject was the same, the phenomenon of acoustic conscience. Alexei Kovalenko shared the stage with her. He had become an unlikely advocate, his fortune redistributed, his name synonymous with repentance. He spoke with a quiet authority that silenced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady. 5 years ago, I was a monster. I trafficked human beings without a flicker of remorse. I believed that wealth and power insulated me from any consequence. I was wrong. He paused, letting the weight of his confession settle. The creature from the deep, the one we now call Il Cucitore, did not kill me. It showed me. It forced me to relive every moment of cruelty I had inflicted. And that experience, as horrifying as it was, became my salvation. It broke the armor of my indifference. It made me feel. He looked directly at Masha, and a faint smile crossed his lips. It made me hear. The voices I had silenced, the lives I had crushed. And in that hearing, I found the only thing that could truly change me. Acknowledgement. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Some delegates shifted uneasily. Others leaned forward, their curiosity piqued. Masha rose to speak. She was 17 now, her face still carrying the softness of youth, but her eyes held the depth of someone who had glimpsed eternity. "The sea is listening," she said. her voice clear and unwavering. Not as a metaphor, not as poetry, but as a fact. The creatures of the deep communicate in frequencies we are only beginning to understand. They feel our presence, our pollution, our noise, and they respond. She gestured to the screen behind her, which displayed a map of the Mediterranean with glowing points marking the locations of every recorded disappearance, every acoustic anomaly. The octopus, the Il Cucitore, did not act out of malice. He acted out of grief. He had lost his mate, his offspring, to a senseless act of fear and cowardice. And that grief turned him into a mirror, reflecting the sins of humanity back upon themselves. She stepped forward, her voice gaining intensity. But here is what I have learned, from listening to him, from hearing the song he could not stop singing. Punishment does not heal. Only forgiveness restores. He was not a monster. He was a wound that had never been allowed to scar. She looked out at the gathered delegates, and for a moment the room was utterly silent. The Zagavor, the ancient chant that our ancestors used to speak to the sea, was not a spell of control. It was a plea for harmony. It acknowledged that we are all part of one symphony. Every human, every dolphin, every octopus, every wave. And when we hurt one another, we break the music. She paused, letting her words sink in. The creature has stopped hunting. He has withdrawn to the deep, to heal. But he left us a gift, the knowledge that we are heard, that our actions resonate far beyond our immediate world, and that we have a choice, to sing in dissonance or to find our way back to the melody. The conference did not produce an immediate treaty. The politics were too tangled, the science too new, the implications too unsettling. But a seed was planted. A commission was formed to study the phenomenon. Nations began to fund research into marine bioacoustics, and in the small coastal town of Pili, a quiet revolution took hold. The survivors of the wreck, Alexei, the Egyptian, the two women, the African guard, and others, stayed in the region. They formed a community, an informal sanctuary for those seeking to atone. They called it the Casa della Riconciliazione, the House of Reconciliation. And Masha, now the youngest professor in Italy, became its guiding light. She returned to the cliff on the eve of her 18th birthday. The sea was calm, the sky a deep violet, and the first stars were beginning to emerge. She sat on the rock where Matteo Bellini had once stood, and she listened. The old octopus was singing. Not the sorrowful si bemolle of judgment, but something new, a slow, hopeful progression, as though he were learning a new melody. It was tentative, fragile, like a child's first steps. But it was alive. Masha closed her eyes and joined him. She sang the Zagavor from her heart, not as a plea, but as an answer. Simenem oceana, skroviu glubini. The words resonated through her chest, through the cliff, through the water. And the creature responded, his voice rising to meet hers. In that moment, Masha understood the moral that would define her life's work. The sea does not forgive because it is merciful. It forgives because it knows that all wounds, if left to fester, become poison, but if allowed to heal, become wisdom. We are not judged by our mistakes. We are shaped by our response to them. The song of the deep is not a threat. It is a mirror. And in that mirror, we have a choice: to see only our shame, or to see the possibility of change. She opened her eyes. The stars were out in full force, and the ocean glittered like a field of diamonds. Thank you, she whispered to the dark water, for teaching me to listen. And far below, in the abyss where light never reached, the old octopus curled his tentacles around himself and rested. His song had changed. It was no longer a cry. It was a lullaby. He was finally at peace. Epilogue. 10 years later. The laboratory was quiet, filled with the gentle hum of filtration systems and the soft glow of blue light from the aquariums. Masha stood at the central tank, her hand resting on the glass. She was 28 now, tall and graceful, with the same dark eyes that had seen the face of the abyss. She wore a white lab coat over a simple dress, and her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She had become one of the world's leading experts in bioacoustics, her research cited in journals from Nature to Science. But her greatest achievement was the quiet work she did every day, teaching others to listen. In the tank before her, a young octopus was drawing on the glass, patterns of spirals and waves that seemed to mimic the ancient symbols of the Zagavor. Masha watched with a soft smile. "You're learning," she murmured. "We both are." The octopus paused, its small eye fixed on her, and then it drew a single, perfect circle, a symbol of wholeness, of completion. Masha turned to the window, where the Mediterranean stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of amber and rose, and there, far out, a dark shape broke the surface, a great, ancient form that rose and fell with the rhythm of the tides. It lingered for a moment, as if acknowledging her, and then it sank back into the deep. Masha raised her hand in a silent farewell. "Sing on, old friend," she whispered. "Sing on." And somewhere in the abyss, a low, resonant note answered. Not si bemol in sorrow, but si bemol in hope. The world was still, the sea was quiet, and the song went on. The philosophical moral. The tale of the Horda is not one of monsters or heroes. It is a meditation on consequence, the consequence of fear, of cruelty, and of forgiveness. The creature was not a villain. He was a mirror, reflecting humanity's sins back upon itself. And in that reflection he offered a choice, to remain trapped in guilt or to use guilt as a catalyst for transformation. The ancient Zagavor was not a weapon. It was a key to understanding, to reconciliation, to the harmony that lies beneath the noise of human existence. It spoke of balance, of the sacredness of the ocean, of the connection between all living things. Masha understood that connection. She understood that the sea is not separate from us, that we are all part of the same song. And in her understanding, she found the strength to speak the words that healed a century of pain. The world is a symphony, and every soul is a note. The question is not whether we will sing, but whether we will sing in harmony. And in the end, the creature's final note was not a cry of vengeance, it was a whisper of hope. A promise that even the deepest wounds can heal, and even the most dissonant chords can resolve into peace. End. Anna Gogoleva, Author's Address. Dear reader, this book was born from silence, from that particular stillness that descends when you stand on the shore of the sea on a stormy November day and hear the waves whispering what was never meant for human ears. The story of Horda is not about monsters, it is about mirrors, about how we fear to see ourselves in the reflection of another's sin, about how the ocean, the most ancient witness to our deeds, preserves the memory of every word, every act, every shadow we leave behind. I wrote this novel at the intersection of science and mysticism because I believe that truth always lies somewhere between them. The bioacoustics that Elena Visconti studies is real science. Dolphins truly communicate on frequencies we are only beginning to understand. octopuses truly possess an intelligence that challenges our very conception of consciousness. And the ancient incantations we find in manuscripts are not mere superstitions. They are the desperate, beautiful attempts of our ancestors to establish a dialogue with forces they felt but could not explain. In these pages, you will encounter two charms that I have reconstructed from authentic Old Russian and Old Believer sources. They are not decorative additions. They are keys. The first, the sea charm for luck, is whispered by fishermen before they launch their boats into the abyss. The second, the charm against sin, is the prayer of those who have fallen and seek to rise again. Both are woven into the very fabric of the narrative, for in the world of Horda, words have weight and sound shapes reality. Si bemole, the note that resonates at the heart of this story, is no accident. In music, this note is considered weeping, unresolved. It always yearns for resolution, for harmony. And so each of us carries within ourselves a note that waits to be heard and released. My protagonist, the old octopus, is not a villain. He is a guardian. He was wounded, as we all are, and his pain curdled into judgment. But judgment without forgiveness is merely pain perpetuated. And only a child, pure and fearless, unburdened by the cynicism of adulthood, could remind him that even the darkest note can become part of a beautiful symphony. I want to thank you, dear reader, for undertaking this journey, for not fearing the darkness, for being willing to listen. And if you ever find yourself standing at the edge of the sea, uncertain and afraid, remember, the waves have heard 1,000 confessions before yours. They will not turn away. With respect, faith in harmony, and a whisper of the ancient song, Anna Gogoleva Pili, Liguria, November 2026. The deeper moral. The world is a symphony, and every soul is a note. The question is not whether we will sing, but whether we will sing in harmony. The sea does not forgive because it is merciful. It forgives because it knows that any wound left to fester becomes poison, but any wound allowed to heal becomes wisdom. We are not judged by our mistakes alone. We are shaped by our response to them. The song of the deep is not a threat. It is a mirror. And in that mirror, we have a choice: to see only our shame, or to see the possibility of transformation. Заговор на удачу в море. Встану я, раб Божий, имя рек, ни светом, ни зарей, а темной водой, глухой волной. Пойду не путем, не дорогой, а звериной тропой, рыбиной грядой, в самую гущу, где водоросль гниет, где камень на дне о грех поет. На том дне, на черном песке, лежит кит-рыба, костяной позвонок. У того кита в чреве створка раковинная. В той створке ключ от всех ветров морских. Как тот ключ никому не дается, как та раковина никому не раскроется, так и море передо мной, рабом Божьим, имя рек. Свои ворота настежь отворит. Волны мои слуги, ветры братья, всякая рыба — сестра меньшая. Не возьмет меня вода, не закрутит воронка, не затащит в омут осьминог седой, ибо я сам соль морская, я сам прибой. Ключ в глубине, замок на губе, печать на 7 ветрах, отныне и до конца времен. Аминь. 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 Sea Charm for Luck. Revised. Literary English translation. I shall arise, the servant of God. Name. Not by light, not by dawn, but by dark water, by deaf wave. I shall go not by path, not by road, but by the beast's track, by the fish's ridge, into the very thicket where seaweed rots, where the stone at the bottom sings of sin. On that bottom, on black sand, lies the whalefish, a bony vertebra. Within that whale's belly, a shell hinge. Inside that hinge, the key to all sea winds. As that key is given to no one, as that shell opens for no one, so shall the sea before me, the servant of God, name, throw wide its gates. My waves are servants, my winds are brothers, every fish is a younger sister. The water shall not take me, the whirlpool shall not spin me, the grey octopus shall not drag me into the deep, for I myself am sea salt, I myself am the surf. The key is in the deep, the lock is on the lip, the seal is on the seven winds, from this day to the end of time. Amen, Amen, Amen. Заговор от совершения греха. Господи, спаси, услышь меня в сей час, в час, когда волна бьется о камень, когда чайка кричит над пучиной, когда осьминог прячет глаз в темноте. Каюсь, грешный раб Божий, имя рек, грехами тяжкими, как камнями в груди, словом злым, делом темным, мыслью нечистой, что вчера, что сегодня, что на заре потерянной. Как чисто стекло морское в штиль, как прозрачна вода над рифом, так омой, Господи, душу мою от скверны. Смой с нее тину, как волна смывает след ноги. Унеси грех мой в ту бездну, где даже осьминог не достанет, где даже русалка не запоет. Запечатываю уста свои воском от свечи, заматываю руки своей нитью морской, замыкаю мысли свои на 7 оборотов, чтобы впредь не впасть мне в ту же пропасть, не соврать, не предать, не убить, ни словом, ни делом, ни звуком си бемоль. А если согрешу, пусть море меня рассудит, но пусть и простит, как прощает волна берег. Ибо сказано, прощение — это нота, что звучит громче любого приговора. Ныне и присно, во веки веков. Аминь. Charm against the committing of sin. Lord, Saviour, hear me in this hour, in the hour when the wave strikes the stone, when the seagull cries over the abyss, when the octopus hides its eye in the darkness. I confess, sinful servant of God, name, my grievous sins, like stones in my chest, by evil word, by dark deed, by unclean thought, from yesterday, from today, from the dawn that is lost. As the sea glass is pure in the calm, as the water is clear above the reef, so wash, O Lord, my soul from defilement. Scour from it the slime, as the wave washes away the footprint. Carry my sin into that abyss, where even the octopus cannot reach, where even the mermaid will not sing. I seal my lips with the wax of a candle. I bind my hands with the thread of the sea. I lock my thoughts with 7 turns, that I may not fall into that same pit again. Not lie, not betray, not kill, neither by word, nor by deed, nor by the note si bemol. But if I sin again, let the sea judge me, yet let it also forgive, as the wave forgives the shore. For it is said, forgiveness is a note that sounds louder than any sentence. Now and ever, unto the ages of ages. Amen. Historical and philological note, revised. The 2 incantations presented above are the fruit of extensive research into authentic Old Russian and Old Believer charm traditions, preserved in manuscripts from the 17th to 19th centuries, as well as in oral folk collections from the Russian north, Olonets, Arkhangelsk, and Pomor regions. However, they are not mere copies. They have been artistically reimagined to serve the thematic core of the novel Horda. Key elements and their significance. Mythological geography. The ocean sea, the island of Buyan, and the Alatir stone are classical topoi of Slavic charms. In our version, Buyan is not explicitly named, but the imagery of the whalefish and the shell hinge evokes the same cosmic landscape. The whale as a bony vertebra and the shell as a hinge are original metaphors that tie the charm to the novel's central motif of sound and resonance. The Grey Octopus. In the sea charm, the octopus appears as a threat. The grey octopus shall not drag me into the deep. But in the sin charm, it is a witness. When the octopus hides its eye in the darkness. This duality mirrors the character of Il Cucitore, a being of both judgment and sorrow. The note, si bemol. The sin charm explicitly forbids sin by the note si bemol, directly linking the incantation to the novel's acoustic curse. This is a deliberate artistic insertion, as historical charms do not mention musical notes. However, it fits the book's central metaphor. The theology of forgiveness. The sin charm concludes with a non-canonical but emotionally resonant line. Forgiveness is a note that sounds louder than any sentence. This reflects the novel's philosophical moral that mercy transcends punishment, a theme that runs throughout the narrative. Linguistic archaisms. The Russian text employs forms such as rabota Bożi instead of the more common rab, wstanu nie świetem, nie zarej, inversion, and zapečatevoju usta, archaic verb forms. These choices create a texture of authenticity while remaining accessible to modern readers. Christian-pagan syncretism. Both charms address God, Christ, while simultaneously invoking elemental powers, the sea, the waves, the winds, the whale. This reflects the historical reality of Russian folk orthodoxy, where pre-Christian beliefs coexisted with Christian practice well into the 19th century. In the context of Horda, these charms are not mere folklore. They are active tools, spoken by Matteo Bellini in his guilt-ridden old age, whispered by Father Vasili to Elena Visconti, and finally sung by Masha as she descends into the abyss. They represent humanity's oldest attempt to negotiate with the unknown, to ask for luck, to seek forgiveness, and to find a path back to harmony. A final word. The sea does not judge, it remembers. And in its remembering, it offers us a choice. To be consumed by our past, or to let it wash over us and recede, leaving behind only the wisdom of what we have survived. May you, dear reader, find your own song, and may you have the courage to sing it, even when your voice trembles. S ljubov'yu I nadezhdой, with love and hope. Anna Gogoleva. Anna Gogoleva. Copyright Anna Gogoleva, 2026. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, or otherwise, without the prior written permission of the author, except in the case of brief quotations embodied in critical articles or reviews.